I do not know why I played that intro, so I am going to play the other one and then we'll start over because that
I
is
kind
not
of
the
like
right
that one,
intro.
actually.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep it in there for those of you who are watching. I played the wrong intro, so here we go with the correct one. Let me find it real quick, and it will be here. And we will. Yeah, it's so fun to not get it right sometimes, and you just keep going with what you know, right? Okay, so that's that one. Where is it here? Okay, come on, Brian. Da, 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 da.
Life throws you curveballs, right?
I know. Here we go. All right. All right, all right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time of the day it is where you are watching this and wherever you're at. We're just so excited that you are here with us today, that you have honored us with your time, because I know time is this valuable commodity, and it's one of those things that we don't ever get back. And so the fact that you want to spend time with us today, hear what we got to say, and then maybe apply it to your life just makes me excited and happy and joyous that you have actually committed to being with us. And so today I am so excited. I have Glenna on with me today, and I'm going to let her tell us her story at one point. But there are people in your life that you go, okay, this person is just, hey, they're steady at it. They're doing what it takes. For some of them, hey, they get to make a lot of money. You just don't ever know how they did it or why they did it, because they're just so into themselves and just don't share a lot. They just say, yeah, I have I have a hurdler, so I just resigned from coaching track after 39 years at the end of the couple weeks, or we had the state meet was last Saturday, and so I have an athlete that in high school that we had one that won the high jump and one that won the hurdles. And so he's a sophomore that won the hurdles this year. And you try to see if he's excited about it. And like, okay, so I need you to do this and this. Like, yep, yep. And I would say, okay, so we got to do this. Oh, you won. Yep, yep. And it's like, okay, how are you going to get excited? You are the best high school hurdler in the state of Colorado. You're the best sophomore that ever existed. And you just did some phenomenal stuff. Can you get a little bit excited? And he's like, yeah, yeah. And so it's so funny. And so when I think about Glenna, that's not her. She's not going to be that person that you just go, yep, yep, and we ask a question and she answers, because she has done so much in her life and helped so many people get to their life. And I think I guess the sign or the success or the clue of a great champion or somebody who's a winner is if you can look at the people that came after them and how they talk about that person and their lives and what their lives have been changed to as a result of that person being part of it. Because when I think about living boldly with purpose, I don't think that you can live boldly in purpose. This is my own opinion, as others say that you can, but I don't think you can live boldly with purpose and be in purpose and be in your calling without serving other folks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know, Glenna, you have done a tremendous job of doing that in your career and in your life. And I can't wait to hear your story and what you have for us. I tell everybody, hey, your story can start at your mama's womb. Somebody told me, I can remember when I was in my mama's womb. I'm like, no, you can't. You lie. But I guess it's possible. I don't know. The human brain can do probably about anything. And so if you remember that, that's great. Or anywhere in your life that you want. And then we will move on from there. So Glenna, the floor is yours. I can't wait for you to just dive in, and then we're going to chop it up a little bit right after that. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. And I'm so honored to have you here today.
Dr. B, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be with you. And just the name of your show, Living Boldly with Purpose. I think sometimes it's a destination and sometimes it's a way of being. And you don't always know when you're planning it. I think you know it when you're looking over your shoulder and you go, oh, that's what I did. I was living boldly with purpose. I just didn't plan it in advance. And so, as I look back on my life, I'm very, very fortunate and blessed. Born in California, raised in Chicago. I was an only child, so I was one of those kids that learned how to make highballs for my parents at like 4 years old. And and I went with them everywhere. And they exposed me to theater, and I happened to be a very talented kid, sang, danced, etc. And my folks were very, very focused on how do you make a difference? How do you live in the world and understand that everyone doesn't look like you and act like you? And that to me was a gift, not in the planning stage, but in the looking back over my shoulder stage. Just imagine a little kid who was 6 or 7 years old who sang like nobody's business with long braids and bangs. And my mom would take me to Operation Push with Jesse Jackson and I would perform. And it was really just being with an audience of people who I appreciated and appreciated me for my talent, and was very fortunate with that. Fast forward, I, did what most kids do, went to high school, went to college. I traveled with a group called Up With People for about 18 months and sang and danced with that, and was always a very talented person and enjoyed being in theater, not only because it made other people happy, but because of the rigor and what you needed to do to be on stage and successful. And so I did that for college years, did it after college for a period of time. And no surprise, theater led me into training and development. Because to some degree, training is like business theater, if that makes any sense, and getting the point across and giving information to people. And I was always an excellent speaker. I just needed to find a way to apply it, not on a stage, but on a business stage. And so I started in training and development, working in a lot of department stores, one specifically Marshall Field's in Chicago, many people know about, and did it for years, very, very successfully, and really would like to think that I impacted other people's lives. I tried to. And what was so funny was that one day the head of HR came to me and said, we're going to move you out of training into human resources. And I went, oh, are you going to fire me?
I love it.
He said, no, why would you ever say something like that? And I said, well, because a lot of people that may not be successful in their career, you move into administration. He goes, no, I think you'll be great. It'll only be for a year or so. Well, go figure. Many, many years later and many companies later, I worked in human resources and had training and development. Did that at Marshall Field's, was very blessed that I worked for restaurant companies and had all the restaurants at Walt Disney World. And then one day got a phone call from somebody that said, who are you? Everyone in Chicago knows you. And well, I give back a lot. I believe in sharing what I know. And she said, well, the most important question about this call is, do you drink coffee? And I went, yeah, I do. As a matter of fact, I can't cook, so coffee is about all I have most of the time. And it happened to be a call from Starbucks. Before the company went public, they had found me and said, would you like to come and help us with human resources in Chicago? And just imagine, at that point, there were only 200 stores in the whole company. And I was with them for many, many years, opened 14 markets, and went from a couple of hundred people to over 6,000 people in my career with them, and was very fortunate to be there. It was one of the best experiences of my life, and identified and worked with people that have now gone on to be so very successful and they had an impact on me, and I'd like to think I had an impact on them as well. I stayed in corporate for a period of time, moved to Dallas, Texas, and after downsizing myself a number of times, senior HR people, when a company starts to change, they obviously have less and less responsibility. And so I would write my own severance agreement and shake my own hand. And in 2015, I started my own HR consulting and training business called Humanistic Consulting, and work as an outsourced HR strategist. And obviously will advise CEOs about how do you deal with people issues. One of the things I found that's so interesting, and I'm sure your audience that is in the business world will relate to this. Most leaders, CEOs of businesses don't have somebody confidentially to talk to about how do you run your business and do it with people. Mm-hmm. Don't. And so they may go home and try to talk about it with their spouse, but after a while, it's kind of like, okay, enough. You know what I mean? Not anymore, the business convo. And so what I found was my value was not only talking to leaders about organizational strategy and change and how do you structure your company, but about people that perhaps needed to be motivated differently and may have had some issues along the way. And then my former training experience led to speaking on leadership and HR and main stages. So I was very blessed with that. It's funny, early on, I had a game-changing situation occur. So here I was leading huge companies, up to 15,000 people, really making a difference in organizations. And one day I got a phone call that said, your mother is missing. Oh, wow. And yeah, my cousin called me from Chicago and said, your mom has wandered out the door. She hasn't come home yet, 85 years old. You need to get home. And here I was in Dallas, and my mom's in Chicago. And I walked into my boss's office, like so many people do, and said, I have to deal with this. I don't have a choice. And if you want to replace me, then, I would understand, but I only have one mom. Mm-hmm. And that was my last corporate job. And when I downsized myself, I had already moved my mom from Chicago to Dallas. She had been diagnosed the day after I flew there with dementia. And I immediately, literally in a moment, became a caregiver for 9 years. And and of those 9 years, 7 of those, she was on hospice. So it was really quite extraordinary. And here's what was so interesting. I learned very quickly that my mom had shaved off a few years of her age my entire life. Mm-hmm. The woman I thought was 85 was actually 90 years old. And imagine I cared for her until 19 days shy of 100. So it was an amazing ride. But here's the thing. Caregiving was the hardest leadership experience I've ever had in my life. And the reason why, I was a VP of HR for huge companies. Mm-hmm. I fixed things, right? When there were layoffs or company issues or people not performing or restructuring or benefits plans or changes in the government, it always landed on my desk. And I was the one that was the fix-it person, as most senior HR people are. And here I thought, okay, I've got this amazing set of skills that I've used my entire life. I can fix my mom. I can make this dementia go away. Yeah. And 2 years in, I went to, oh my gosh, support groups, did research. I even became an assisted living manager, and nothing worked. Nothing worked.
Oh yeah, you can't fix your mom, right?
Dementia is not something you fix, it's something you face.
Yes.
And what I realized was if I couldn't fix it, I'd be the best daughter that I possibly could for the entire time that she was on the planet. And when I gave it up, what happened was quite miraculous. So one day I walked in and mom was sitting and she was posing. And at that point, she was probably 93. And she looked at me and said, "Oh, I love the beach. It's so amazing. And look at the ocean and look at the, look at the sand." And she was posing and flirting with the boys. And at that point, she was in her 20s. And I thought, oh my God, my mom's dying. And she wasn't. She was so full of bliss. And I thought, oh man, if this is what it's like, I want to get back to the beach. So every time I visited her, I would ask her that. And I would say, "Are you at the beach?" And she'd go, "No." Okay, that didn't work. "Are you 22? No. And then finally one day I walked in and I said to her, "I have forgotten, how old are you?" And she looked at me and said, "Guess." And that became a back and forth game that became a ritual. And believe it or not, eventually it became an award-winning book.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Yeah. So I wrote a memoir that includes the dementia relationship game, How Old Are You Today? It has really become my mission.
Okay.
So why is that? Because all of the experience I had fixing and leading and speaking and doing HR never prepared me for what it was like to be a caregiver. And I know a lot of caregivers don't have any hope. It's such a hard thing to do. And if my experience, my book, my game can give them a minute of hope in this, then I will be extremely thankful. But here's the why, not only about the book. And that is, I wanted to know what my legacy was. I wanted to make sure that I left something behind. I know you have 8 kids, Dr. B.
I do, yes.
Amazing. I don't have children. My children had 4 legs. And so, I thought, what am I going to do to put my stamp on the planet? I'd like to think that my relationships and my personality and my heart have impacted people, but it's got to be more than that. At least that was it for me. And so how did I live with purpose? So here's what I've done over the last number of years that I'm really proud of. One is the proceeds of Humanistic Consulting, my business, are donated to 13 charities around the planet. And so everything that comes to me comes through me. And it could be Doctors Without Borders or Alzheimer's and Dementia or SPCA or whatever it is, St. Jude's, that impacts other lives. I started a scholarship for young women going to college to focus on entrepreneurship and making a difference.
Okay.
And then the proceeds, 30% of the proceeds of the book go to dementia Alzheimer's research. And I have a goal to sell 200,000 and donate $2 million to that cause. So I have a big, bold why.
Yeah, you do.
It seems overwhelming at times, but it pulls you into the future and drives you forward, and it makes sure that what you're doing is aligned with why you're doing it. And so I'm very blessed, and certainly to be on the podcast, because we're aligned in that part of our relationship.
Yeah. So many things I want to unpack in your story and the things that you do, because if success leaves clues, and the way that you've been able to be successful can help another person and guide them, I think it's so cool. But I think about identity, right? And the different identities that you have, because I don't know if there was expectations when you were a child star that you would go on to Hollywood and do all films and all that kind of stuff. And how do you live within that as an identity? When you talked about Upward People, I can remember like Up with People, I guess, coming to our home and staying there when they were doing performances in Colorado, and talking to them when I was younger. And then, your identity as this corporate executive, and what your responsibilities were there, and, how you interact with people. But then the identity of, I have to take care of somebody. And then I guess the last identity that I think of, and your identities might be different than what I'm thinking, but the one is immediately after your mom passed. Now, do you still have an identity? Like, how do you go back to who you were, because you now spent 9 years taking care of an individual, and then it's like, okay, who am I? And like, I mean, I see where it came from and it developed to, but maybe kind of just talk through how you dealt with all those different identities in your
Oh
life.
my gosh, what a great question. Um, being on a stage as a kid, and having this, what I would call, almost perfect persona, right? I looked good, I sang good, I did all of those kinds of things, and was not in school a lot because I was performing. And so part of what I was very fortunate was that my parents really talked about the importance of relationship and the importance of school. And, our house was the house that everyone was at. And I am blessed by that because it taught me how to get along with other people and the importance of other people in your life. When I think about Up with People, oh my gosh, what a blessing. I was able to do things that most people probably wouldn't have an opportunity to do. And not because I did them, I just happened to be in this organization that did them. And I learned that people were different than I was, that we were all raised differently, but there was something to gain in all of those interactions. I remember some really difficult environments that we stayed at. You said, you remember folks staying at your home. I stayed in many, many houses, and there were so many people that didn't have a lot, but were willing to open their home to give it to you. And that says a lot about heart and what you can learn from folks. Did I always get it perfect? No, because I was a young adult and I was, learning me while I was learning them. But it really was an opportunity to travel with people who are not like me. And some of those folks are in my life today in a big way. I traveled with American Indians. I traveled with people that came from the Watts district in LA. I traveled with folks all over the world. And they were just friends that expanded my mind and allowed me to learn and listen, which I think was very powerful. Leading lots of people, folks will say, when I was in some of my jobs, I led, 15,000 people, 6,000 people. And folks are like, how do you do that? And I said, one person at a time. You're not talking to this, you're talking to this. And if a person has an issue, it's their issue and they want to know somebody listen to them. And so that's really what I learned was, how do I bring the relational skills from an HR standpoint to interactions with people. I also learned that sometimes HR people get a bad rap, and folks think that they're the policy police. And so I made a decision early on that I was going to do that differently. I was going to have interactions with people so that they understood not always the what, which is important, but the why. So we may have a policy and you can't do this, but let me tell you why you can't do this. And they would be like, oh, now I get it. And so I was always very much that type of person, even as the organizations got bigger and bigger and bigger. Going out on my own was a lesson for sure, because I didn't know what I was doing. And so that was, a test every single day. I do one thing, but now I have to be an accountant, and now I have to be a salesperson, and now I have to be in technology. Yeah. And what I learned was, because I don't know everything, I don't want to figure it all out. I want to rely on people who are way smarter than I am and call them in and ask for advice. You asked a really great question about, mom and what it was like after. A lot of that is in the book, because the experience with her was truly, as I say to people, one of the greatest gifts of my life. Most people don't think of dementia as a gift. And for me, it was absolutely that and then some. I learned more about her life. I learned more about my life. I learned about what it was like when I was a newborn, and I can share that with you. And that was through the time travel game that I developed. And so we had just the most wonderful time together. And when she passed, there were no regrets. A lot of people have that with their parents. I was very fortunate that I had said what I needed to say and we discussed it. And so I went through orphan syndrome for a while, being an only child, and what that was like going, okay, what's my identity in the planet by myself? And not always easy, for sure. But I'll share with you probably the most interesting part of the experience in writing. And that is, it took me 11 years to write the book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And the reason is I sat down and started to write it, a couple of years after she passed away. And it was very, very shallow. It was, surface level stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, what is with you? What, this is not good. And so not good for the reader, but there's nothing here. And
Yeah.
I finally asked myself the difficult question, which is, what is this? And why are you writing this way? And I answered with a very profound answer. And that was, I had been, in senior levels in my career in theater and about looking good. And there were so many times as a caregiver, I was not that at all. And excuse me, I was not willing to be vulnerable in my book. I was not willing to admit that I lost my temper when my mom said the same thing 6 times, and I lost my stuff, and I ran out of her assisted living crying and went home and crawled in a closet. I wasn't willing to say that. And until I was, I put it aside. And so I've said a lot of times I had to become the person who could write this book. And I did. Last year in 2025, I said, okay, I'm it. I'm ready to open it up because other people need to hear about the struggle and a caregiving, but they also need to hear about how somebody who is a leader and a strategist and a speaker and all of the things that I was can screw it up, right? And learn from it. And so I wrote the book. It took about 6 months, and it was exactly what I wanted to say. And so folks that have known me for years said, I never knew you were going through this way. Yeah. Never knew it. And that to me was the testament that I had become the person I wanted to be to share this story. So that's what got me to where I am now.
Oh, so cool. One of the questions that I had, and as I think about your job as a corporate leader and executive, and if you think about John Maxwell, he talks about the loneliness of leadership and the things you go through. And I'm thinking what you did in your corporate world, but I can imagine the loneliness of caring for somebody who has dementia is maybe even greater, because at points they don't really know who you are, right? They're in their own world, and you're the only one going through it yourself, because you don't have, I mean, sometimes we have family that can come in and help, but you didn't. You're the only child who's now in charge of it. Kind of talk to me about, maybe the day in the life of, somebody who has this disease, and you're the caretaker's side of it, because we spend so much time talking about what the person's going through, but the person that is in charge, I guess, of making sure that that person's quality of life is good. Maybe just kind of walk us through that a little bit.
Well, and I'll share something else with you, because I think, profound comment, which is the loneliness. Mm-hmm. As a senior HR person, that can be a very lonely role.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is I know all the stuff.
Of course.
Right? I mean, I do. I know all the stuff and can't talk about it with anybody.
Yeah,
right.
No.
And so it's really, you know, who's under investigation for this and who has that and all of it. And so I got very used to processing my own information and trying to come up with the best solution and the things that I needed to do to be fairly grounded in that, if that makes any sense. And so I journal, I've always written, you know, I work out, I eat healthy, I do things to take care of myself so that I'm clear and logical. And that's part of what I did with my consulting, was I realized most senior leaders can be in a lonely situation as well, and they don't have somebody to talk to. So that's a lot of the service that I provide. As a caregiver, it's funny because in the beginning, as I said, I tried to fix it. So I took everything I thought I had learned in corporate and brought it into caregiving, and nothing worked because, you know, particularly with dementia, they time travel. One day they're 90, the next day they're 60, then they're 30, then they're all over the map. And most of the time, caregivers try to fix them and they correct them. No, mom, it's 2025. Here's a newspaper. There's the clock, you know, and I did the same thing. And there are some pearls that I put in the book that are related directly to that. And one is connection over correction. I realized that that's what I wanted. I just didn't know how to get there. And so doctors will always say, meet them where they are, but nobody tells you how to do that. So you have this trial and error thing going on. And then when I stumbled on the game and I would play it with her, and there are rules to the game, there's an art to the game. There are experiences that I had when I was playing it, and I'll share a couple with you. What I realized in the life of a caregiver is there are really two pieces of it. There's the interaction with the person who you're giving care to, and then there's all the stuff you have to do as a caregiver, right? Yeah. And the interacting with, you are in essence the follower, you are not the leader. And the game is all about how do you ask questions so that you can follow their lead. I've actually had people read the book and say they have children who are on the spectrum or children that have Down syndrome, and they're using the things that I put in the book in those interactions as well, because you never really lead. You're always, if you're observant, you're always following, right? And so that is part of what I did. The other part of caregiving is really the exhausting kind of, how do I do this stuff, right? When do I put them in a home? What do I do when they get angry? How do I feed them? And there are so many resources in every city across the country. People are reaching out to me and saying, you know, can you help me with it? And I've helped men find men groups. I've helped people find elder attorneys. I have referred them to organizations, and to say to them, you know, you don't have to do this alone. There are a lot of really experienced, wonderful people out there whose mission is to give you information to help you. And I just put a video out yesterday, actually. I was on a podcast, and it was the duality of caregiving. Okay. It's everything from, right, exhilaration because something works, to exhaustion, you know, happiness to frustration, anger and sadness to laughter. And the most important thing that a caregiver can do, which is what I found, was you have to give yourself some grace. You're doing the best you can, right? No rule book, no employee handbook, no job description. You're just going, okay, today was a 6 out of a 10. Tomorrow, I hope will be better. And you just put one foot in front of the other and reach out to people and ask for advice and try to do the things that you can. And I was very fortunate that I did that. I was also fortunate in an unusual way, Dr. B, and that is I have my mom's energy. And she was walking 8 to 10 miles a day when she was in her 80s. Okay.
Okay.
Which is great. But as someone with dementia, she was a flight risk.
Of course. 8 to 10 miles is not like 20 minutes. 8 to 10
No.
miles is several hours.
She
right?
would walk out the door and she would go. And so because of that, I was told very early on, not only could she not live on her own, but she couldn't live with me, because if I went into another room and she walked out the front door, there she goes. So she had to be in a assisted living facility. She had to be in a unit for people that had cognitive impairment. And because of that, the most important thing was that she was safe. And so, we did that. I visited her every single day, but I also could sleep at night knowing that she was probably not going to walk out the door, right? But I'll share with you a couple of just fascinating experiences. Probably people will ask me, what's your favorite chapter in the entire book?
Uh-huh.
And it makes me smile because it goes back to your question about the womb.
Okay, there we go.
So I have to share it with you. It's a chapter after I learned the game, and it's called When I Met Me.
Okay.
And my mom at that point was in a nursing home. She was probably about 97 years old. And I would go and meet her for lunch, and the attendants would have a chair, next to her so I could sit. And I walked in, and mom was sitting at the table for lunch, and she was doing this, right? Like she was rocking a baby. And every once in a while, she would do that. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a really interesting day with my mom. And I sat down, and I had learned by that point in time, I would never say, hi, mom, because if I'm a grown woman and she's much younger and her daughter is 13 years old, she has no clue who I am relative to her daughter, right? So I would just, go in and say hello. And I said to her, I have forgotten, may I ask a question? How old are you? And she just kind of like did one of these, and she smiled, and she was, doing this. And I said, do you have a baby? And she said, yes. And I said, is it a boy? She goes, no, it's a little girl. I said, what's her name? And she said, the miracle baby. And I went, okay, this imaginary baby was me.
Okay.
So mom had a number of miscarriages and was supposed to have female surgery. And the doctor said to her, I don't feel comfortable about this. And she was pregnant with me. So they called me the miracle baby. Gotcha. And I said to her, oh, you have a miracle baby, and tell me about the baby. And I said, what was it like giving birth? Uh-huh. And she screamed at the top of her lungs, it hurt.
Wow.
And in this facility, 100 people froze with their forks in midair, right?
Yeah, because you're in the cafeteria. Yeah, oh my God.
Right. And I'm like, it's okay. And so I knew that she was at the point that she had given birth to me. She was 39 years old. And I said to her, do you care for the baby? Yes. And I said, what do you do with the baby? And at that point, I knew I only could ask questions that were yet, specific, informative questions. There's no, you can't say, what do you think about this? Because that's not how their brain works. It's very specific at a point in time. And so she said, I feed the baby, I change the baby, I rock the baby, I bathe the baby. And I said, do you love the baby? Oh, yes, I love the baby. And so I said, you get much sleep? And she said to me, no, because I'm afraid if I go to sleep, the baby will die.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I went, oh, I mean, just imagine here you are as an adult watching your parent holding an imaginary you. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's more than your brain can absorb, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And in that moment, I asked for the words. I said, please give me something I can say because I don't know what to say.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said to her, I saw the baby. and she's beautiful and she's successful and you were a great mom. And she literally went like this and patted me on the head. Mm-hmm. And then in that next second, she literally almost turned into a puddle, and it was though she was on the floor, and she looked at me and said, "Can I go to sleep now?"
Really?
And I said, "Absolutely." And I waved over the aides and they wheeled her back. And I sat in that dingy lunchroom just going, "Oh my God, you have had the experience of a lifetime." It got louder. The colors got brighter. I walked out of there and I felt like I was in slow motion because I never knew what she had said. It was the first time I had ever heard that. And I got in my car and cried for about an hour.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I was motionless. I couldn't even believe it. And I called my best friend in Chicago and I said, "You're not going to believe what happened." And she was silent on the phone. And then I went, "Are you there? Are you there?" And she was crying. And she said, "This experience needs to be shared with other people because they need to be able to have this." And so that was some of my momentum. But, I realized most kids will say to their parents, "What was it like when you had me?" And they'll go, "Oh, I took drugs. It hurt." You know what I mean? And so, they don't have they have the experience as a memory. They don't have the experience being present. And so that's what this whole interaction and game was about. And I had those stories more than I can even imagine to tell. And so they're all here, and other people have used it too, and their stories are also in the book. But I feel just so blessed. And the evolution of that experience really has changed my life going forward.
Wow. I can think when my grandmother was, when she went into assisted living and, started down the dementia road. And I can remember they had a doll that she would have. And then you would ask her what the doll's name was. And it would, she had 11 kids. So it would be one of those kids, maybe a different kid each time. But one of the thoughts that came to me, and maybe as a person who has done this and now written about it and all the research, is, there were other people, like you said, that were saying, "Well, you're not," they would ask her, like, "How old are you?" or whatever. And she would say, whatever age she was, or they would tell her, "Well, no, you're not."
Right.
And my thought was, why does it matter at this stage in her life where we're at? Why do I need to be right? Or why do the people who are asking her these questions need to be right about her life? I mean, is that something that's common that we as folks, that because we remember a certain way, and so we have to tell them, "No, you're 95 years old, you're this, that." I mean, why is that important to us as folks that are going through it, that our, I guess, point of view has to be the one that we're trying to get them to see from?
I think it comes from a different place.
Okay.
Caregiving is so difficult, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to be rational and reasonable while you're dealing with the emotion of losing somebody that you love. That's just the truth.
Okay.
And anything that can keep your feet on the ground, right, and your own sense of reality is really important. And so I think that some of the bringing them to me or trying to fix it is controlling the situation. And if I can control it for just a minute, then it makes me feel like they're not disappearing. Okay. And so, it's such a hard disease. Alzheimer's and dementia. I mean, such a hard disease to watch. And it's really trying to hold on to my reality, right? And so there's a part of it. But what I found was that just doesn't work. Okay. And that's not the disease is time traveling. It is, they lose their short-term memory, they go back to holding a doll, right? They will see a military uniform and they'll stand and they'll pet it for hours, and it makes them think of perhaps their spouse who was in the war, right? Gotcha. Or they'll hear a song and they'll start to dance, and and they haven't danced in years, and you're like, what's going on? It brings them to a different place. And I'll tell you one really crazy and profound experience that I think it'll resonate with you, and I believe with your listeners. So when I had found the game, I didn't know if it only worked for me, right? Because, right? And I'm a really good listener, and I'm funny, and I'm creative. And I thought, okay, just because I can make up stories, maybe it works. I don't know. And so one day I was meeting a work colleague, a gentleman that we refer back and forth to each other. And we were meeting for a networking event. And I sat down with him, and he was exhausted. He could hardly keep his eyes open. And, he just didn't look himself. And I said, okay, we're not talking about business. What's going on with you? Are you okay? And he said to me, no. He goes, my father is in his 80s. He's claiming that he has all kinds of pain. And we've gone to different doctors, and they can't find anything wrong with him. Nothing. He goes, it's time consuming, it's exhausting, it's frustrating, it's expensive, it's all of those things, and they can't find anything wrong with him. Because I don't know what to do. I said, are you willing to try something a little crazy? He goes, I will try anything at this point. So I said, okay, there's a game I invented, and I wrote out on a napkin from the restaurant, I wrote out, question. And I said, practice with me. I'm him, you're you. And he's like, can I ask you a question? How old are you? And they went back and forth. He goes, okay. He said, I'll try it. And you could tell when someone walks away and they don't really believe that anything is going to work, but they're, okay, fine. And so a couple of days later, he called me back and he said, are you a witch? And I go, well, there may be people in my life that would say that, but I'm not sure why you're bringing that up. And he said, I tried this with my father, and he was stuck in a groove. He thought he was 55 years old. Now, mind you, he's in his 80s. He thought he was 55. When he was 55 years old, he had heart trouble. So here he was reliving in his mind his body at that time and experiencing heart trouble. Okay, which if you process that, that's very strange, right? And so he goes, now what do I do? I said, very simple. I said, get an empty pill bottle, go and buy M&Ms, take all the green ones, put them in a bottle, and every day tell him you're giving him his heart medicine.
Yeah.
And he goes, okay. And that's what he did until one day he wasn't that age. He
wasn't 55 anymore, and it didn't matter.
And so it's a matter of kind of giving them some moments of joy. And he had moments of joy and peace knowing that wasn't it. Now, his question was, why don't doctors know this? And I said, because they don't, right? They're internists or they're gastroenterologists. They're not familiar with the dementia, travel and the time travel that will go on. So they don't know it. That's why I'm trying to get this word out, because whatever you can do to go, okay, I don't have to take them to 5 doctors. I just have to buy them, a bag of M&Ms and take the green ones out. And so, now that I know they're okay, we can just have fun and play.
Yeah. My gosh, what's so cool now? So your life now is you are spreading the word of how we do this and how to mention. So you've written a book, you have a game that you created that's out there. What are some of the things that you're doing that are getting the word out? It's a best-selling book, and so you want to have 200,000 copies. This big audacious goal that you're doing. What is your life like now as you're promoting this and getting out there and doing all this?
Well, I actually feel like there's 2 parts of my life, Dr. B. So I still do human resources and speaking, and I'm in a very unusual position to be able to speak not only from an HR perspective, but from a caregiving perspective, because the impact of caregiving at work and on business is astronomical. Companies are spending billions of dollars each year without knowing it when people are, you know, can't step up because they're caring for a parent. So I've now added that type of speaking opportunity to my portfolio to be able to say, how do you have the tough conversations at work to know really what's going on with people in need? So the HR stuff is still very much alive. The book I am spending time marketing. I'm on podcasts such as yours, talking about it, getting the word out there as much as I can. And I'm posting a lot. And a lot of people will say, you know, what's your motivation? My motivation really is to help people and to help caregivers and to give them moments of peace and hope and joy. And that's why I wrote this and why I want to get the word out there. I also want to help business owners because businesses are dealing with this. They don't know what to do or how to do. And so my mission really is, how do I get this message in to help businesses as well? Because rather than losing somebody who's dealing with a parent, there are other things that they can do. I know my situation was, I would have walked out of a VP of HR job in a minute if it was a choice between my mom and the job.
Of course.
And my employer didn't make it a choice. And so I'm very fortunate that that happened, that I was able to have kind of both of those things occur. So I am very wrapped up in both of those places and living passionately, and anything I can do to really get the word out, and then to raise money for the charities and for dementia, Alzheimer's research is what I'm all about.
Oh man, I love it. I've been kind of selfish during this conversation because I've asked you all the questions that I want to know that will fuel what, my mind. What did we not talk about today as we've been doing our show that you want to make sure that all of our audience hears and knows?
Oh my gosh, such a good show. Thank you for asking all of your questions. You covered all of the ones that I would have asked.
Okay.
I think there are really two. One is for people that are employees, and then for caregivers. And for folks that are employed in companies and, they say to themselves, oh, it's a drudge, and how will I ever be able to live boldly with purpose? And I always say to them, identify the thing that you really love the most, and, find joy in it every single day. And you can tell when you talk to somebody in a call center and you know that their purpose is about helping the other person, not about picking up the phone on the sixth ring or putting notes in a computer or whatever they do, but to really know that because I did what I did, you were able to have a really great day, I think is important. And everyone needs to identify what that is for them and what moves them forward in their life, not only their family and their faith and those types of things, but in their work life. There's always an opportunity to do more, be more, and have an impact on other people. For caregivers, for sure, I would say anyone, whether it is dementia or a child or a spouse that has surgery, is to know that you're doing the hardest job on the planet, one foot in front of the other, and to have grace with yourself. You're doing the best you can. And, if I could go like this and give you that hug, I would, because you're my heroes. I know what it was like to be in that, and you really are my heroes on the planet. And so that's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much. I just, as I think of this world that you have been part of, and how big, and the baby boomers, and how many there are, and the age that people are advancing to. I think when I was a child, we thought of people, if they hit their 80s, that was a big deal. Now we're seeing that almost all the folks are in their 90s and 100, and and for a lot of folks, that's if you work for 40 years and you end up 65, and now you're living for another 40 years, that's a whole nother world that we have to be part of. How do people get your book? How do they get the game? How do they interact with you? What is your secret spot where people, because I know there's going to be so many people who want to interact with you as a
Thank
result of
you.
things
Thank
you do.
you. So the book, and I'll hold it up here, is available on Amazon or anywhere books are sold in paperback and ebook. The game is actually baked into the book.
Okay.
And so I teach people how to ask the question and what are the rules and what's the art of the game. And so that certainly is there. The website that I also have is How Old Are You Today? And I know that you have a QR code that I shared with you for your listeners with a free handout that they can learn a little bit more about the game. You mentioned something that I think is really important, and it was profound for me, Dr. B, and that is I would always go to see my mom on New Year's, and I would get up early, like 3, 4 in the morning, because I wanted her to be the first person I saw. And one day I went to her, and she was at that point 97. And I said, do you have New Year's resolutions? And she couldn't talk very clearly at that point. But that day, boy, she was clear as a bell. And she said, I have 5 rules that I live by. In my entire life, I had never heard those 5 rules. Never. No. And so she's talking and I'm writing on my hand. And she said, you know, you have to live every day, laugh every day, learn something new every day, love every day, and say, I love you, and be grateful for what you have. And I think, yeah, talk about profound. And so when she passed away, her service was on her 100th birthday, which was amazing. Yeah. And we had birthday cake and balloons and lots of alcohol. It was wonderful. But I printed that on cards, and people were taking handfuls of them because they said, you know, somebody that lives this long obviously did it right, but I need some rules that I can live by. So I live by those every day as well. And that's the, you know, the after the baby boomer leaves the company, what do you do thing? And I try to learn something new and be grateful for what I have and laugh all the time. So I live by those rules.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't know if we can get better than that. That is a heck of a way to live. Glenna, I'm so glad that you were born. I'm so glad that your mom and you got to experience all that. I mean, this is amazing as a guest and as the things that you're doing. And, you know, I want to continue to whatever I can do to help you move that forward. And so this has been an honor to have you on the show. It has been so fun. I say, every day I said that I want to make sure I make meaningful connections every day, and I want to be present in those conversations. And so in order to be present, and I even say one of my affirmations, I am a master of being, present, because it's so important. Put your phone down and put, eyes up and watch. And you've made it so easy to be present. You've made it so it's been fun to be part of it. Sometimes you're trying to be present because they're off in the la la land and you have no idea what somebody's talking about. But what a meaningful conversation. And so this is your first conversation that you're watching this podcast on. Please subscribe, notifications, all that. We have some amazing guests that come on. Glenna and I aren't done. I promise you we're going to do some other stuff together. And so we're just going to have fun doing life together. And so I just wish you well in all the things that you continue to do, all the things, and the impact you're making on this world is huge. So thank you again, like I said, for being part of the show and being part of who we are and living boldly and living your life boldly with purpose. You guys have an amazing, awesome, just incredible day today, and we'll talk to you on the next one.